Let's get it. Rustin, and they had little difficulty embracing it as a new stage in the campaign. By this time, the white establishment was becoming more subtle in their tactics. Rustin may have been right that transport was a natural target, but following the Supreme Court ruling, cities did not put up much resistance to desegregating buses. Voter registration, the other major push, was the best way to get real political power for blacks over the long term, but it was a slow process, especially when local officials felt able to interpret the law to keep out black voters. In December 1961, the first community-wide protest campaigns began in Albany, Georgia. Now, rather than focusing on a particular target, such as a lunch counter or a bus terminal, the aim was to develop a concerted attack on all local forms of segregation in order to create a crisis that would test the segregationist tolerance. This was not a great success, but lessons were learned and then refined through a process of trial and error to the point where it was responsible for the most dramatic campaigns of the entire movement. The new campaign was much more provocative, almost designed to incite violence, showing how far strategies of nonviolence had moved from when they sought to inspire a reciprocal goodness in the hearts of segregationists. Now it was a contrast between official brutality and dignified demands for basic rights that provided the impact. As Rustin observed, protest becomes an effective tactic to the degree that it elicits brutality and oppression from the power structure. As Rustin observed, protest becomes an effective tactic to the degree that it elicits brutality and oppression from the power structure. If so, the logic was to search for the more brutish police chiefs, a task that became more challenging as the more astute police forces were training their men to arrest without violence. In the spring of 1963 in Birmingham, Alabama, such a chief was found in Eugene Bull Connors. He exceeded expectations in arresting children in his resort to fire hoses and dogs. He exceeded expectations in arresting children in his resort to fire hoses and dogs. This ensured that the demonstrators were clearly the victims. The strategy behind the Birmingham campaign was not so much to provoke violence as to generate a crisis of which violence could be a symptom. When he found himself in jail in Birmingham, facing criticism from local clergymen for unwise and untimely activities, King set out a clear statement of his philosophy. The demonstrations, he insisted, should not be deplored more than the conditions which stimulated them. The objective of nonviolent direct action was negotiation, but to achieve that, it was necessary to create such a crisis and foster such a tension that a community which has constantly refused to negotiate is forced to confront the issue. It seeks to so dramatize the issue that it can no longer be ignored. This was a nonviolent version of propaganda of the deed. In the case of Birmingham, this was achieved as much by sustained economic pressure on the city center as by the excesses of the local police. The two combined to produce a dramatic effect. Again, to quote Rustin, businessmen and chambers of commerce across the South dreaded the cameras. By causing protracted disorder, the hope was that business leaders in Birmingham would be persuaded to accept the desegregation. Hiring more blacks was the price of economic, and hiring more blacks was the price of economic survival. A further objective was to shift the political calculus of the Kennedy administration in favor of a civil rights bill. The theater of conflict was the city center, a relatively compact space that could be flooded with protesters unless the authorities found a way to stop them. Unlike the Alabama campaign, Birmingham was well planned and drew on a strong local organization. It began at the start of April 1963, a couple of weeks before Easter, one of the busiest times of the year for city shops. It opened with the black community boycotting shops and holding demonstrations and sit-ins at lunch counters. All blacks, 250,000 of them out of a city of 600,000 could participate in the boycott of downtown shops. The effect was immediate and damaging. To get the city under control, Police Chief Connors' first tactic was borrowed from Albany. He combined a court injunction to ban sit-ins and demonstrations with the imposition of high bail bonds. Instead of obeying the injunction as in Albany this time, the leadership decided to disobey. King and his top lieutenant, Ralph Aberthenny, were arrested on Good Friday. King thought the timing symbolic and propitious. This was followed by mass defiance on May 2nd. The numbers participating in the demonstration increased with the introduction of thousands of high school students. Soon 1,000 were in jail. The authorities now face a problem of either filling the jails until they were overflowing or trying to stop the demonstrators from reaching their destination. This is when the violence began, as fire hoses, clubs, and dogs were used to stop the demonstrators from moving downtown. These measures failed to stem the tide. A report from the Birmingham sheriff spoke of stuffed jailhouses with rebellious staffs and budgets already overspent for the year. Street officers on the point of cracking from relentless stress, helpless to make further arrests, but caught between taunting demonstrators, omnipresent news cameras, and the conflicting orders of an unstable and divided high command that included Bull Connor. The culminating moment came on May 7th when the whole downtown area was flooded by demonstrators. The police cordons were outflanked by using decoy marches, starting the main marches earlier than normal, while the police were having their lunch and then holding other marchers back until the police were preoccupied. With some 3,000 people effectively occupying the city center, the police had to acknowledge a loss of control. King recalled how one of the businessmen, that's it.